Imagine your childhood bedroom. There is no smartphone charging beside the bed because smartphones do not exist. If the house phone rings, everyone can hear it. If you want to meet a friend, you make a plan before leaving home and then, astonishingly, trust that both of you will appear. You record songs from the radio, remember phone numbers, wait through commercials, and learn patience mostly because technology gives you no alternative. Now move forward a few years. Suddenly there is email, then instant messaging, then search engines, then social media. Then a phone in your pocket becomes a camera, map, newspaper, office, dating service, bank, television, and apparently the place where strangers argue about how to load a dishwasher. If you were born roughly around the late 1970s to early 1980s, that transition may feel unusually familiar. The popular label Xennial was created for people near the border between Generation X and Millennials. Different writers use different birth years. Your topic uses 1976 to 1985. Researchers warn that generational boundaries are not scientific laws, and academic work on Xennials specifically is limited. But the microgeneration idea captures a psychologically interesting experience. Growing up analog and entering adulthood during rapid digitization. That matters because formative environments shape what feels normal. A child born in 1978 and a child born in 1998 may both become perfectly competent adults, but the technologies surrounding their social development are radically different. One learned friendship when most communication ended at the front door, the other grew up with increasing access to digital connection. One experienced adolescence before social media profiles became a public layer of identity. The other may have had that public layer much earlier. But the technology is only the surface. What did that transition teach you psychologically? Xennials often describe remembering both systems from the inside. That can create a specific kind of technological flexibility. You may remember being slightly intimidated by the family computer and then become the person relatives call when the Wi-Fi stops working. You learned new digital tools as innovations rather than as invisible infrastructure. So technology can feel useful without feeling sacred. You can appreciate an app and still remember that human civilization somehow survived dinner without photographing it. Think about privacy. For much of an analog childhood, embarrassing moments had natural expiration dates. You said something awkward at school, went home, and the audience disappeared. A bad photo lived in a drawer. A ridiculous outfit might survive in one family album, but not in a searchable archive. When social media arrived, many Xennials encountered online identity after at least part of their offline identity had already formed. That may help explain why some people in this QSP group have an unusual relationship with social media. Active enough to understand it, old enough to remember not needing it. Again, not everyone. A generation is not a personality type, but the historical sequence matters. Work changed too. Many Xennials entered school with one vision of a career and reached adulthood as the internet began reorganizing entire industries. They watched paper applications become online portals, offices adopt email, and technical skills move from specialty knowledge to basic employability. Learning new systems became normal. There is another transition that is easy to overlook: the way information itself changed. As a child, finding an answer could require a library, an encyclopedia, a phone call, or simply admitting that you did not know. Then the internet gradually turned information into something immediate. That means many Xennials practiced two opposite mental habits during one lifetime. First, how to search when information was scarce. Later, how to filter when information became overwhelming. Those are different skills. One asks, where can I find the answer? The other asks, which answer deserves my trust? That can produce adaptability, but also a strange feeling of permanent transition. You are old enough to remember when the rules looked stable, and young enough to have spent most of adulthood watching those rules update. There is a social side as well. The strange part is that adapting to two worlds can make neither world feel completely native. As children, many people in this age band experienced more unsupervised time than is common in some families today. The 1970s and 1980s are often associated with latchkey childhoods because of dual-income households, single-parent families, and children spending time without direct adult supervision. Research on latchkey children never supported one simple outcome. Some studies found little difference from supervised peers, and reviews noted both possible independence and possible loneliness or fear depending on the child and context. That nuance is important. It is tempting to tell a flattering story. We were left alone and became resilient. But independence can be empowering when the child has support and manageable responsibility. The same situation can be stressful when a child feels unsafe or abandoned. Generational nostalgia often edits out the children who did not experience freedom as freedom. Still, repeated self-directed moments can teach practical confidence. You figure out snacks. You call a friend. You solve small problems. You wait for adults to return. Later, you may feel irritated when a modern device asks permission for something you could have handled manually in 1994. Then came the digital social world, and Xennials had to learn a second form of social life. Researcher Mark Taylor has used the term Xennials to describe the small cohort that sits between Generation X and Millennials, especially in workplace discussions. The usefulness of the label is not that people born from 1976 to 1985 share one personality. They do not. The usefulness is that many were exposed to a particularly sharp technological transition during formative years. Childhood could be mostly analog, while early adulthood suddenly demanded email, search engines, mobile phones, online banking, and eventually social media. You did not merely learn new devices. You repeatedly learned that the normal way of doing something could disappear within a few years. So what happens when your childhood rules and your adult rules belong to different eras? Picture the psychological lesson in that. You learned a phone number because there was no contact list, then later stopped memorizing numbers because the device remembered them. You learned to navigate from printed directions, then watched GPS make that skill optional. You waited for photographs to be developed, then adjusted to taking 20 versions of the same picture instantly. Each transition quietly rewarded flexibility. It also created a strange kind of nostalgia. You can remember the inconvenience of the old system and still miss the texture of it. That is perhaps the defining metaphor of this microgeneration: bilingual without changing countries. Analog taught one language. Digital adulthood taught another. You may understand why an older relative wants to call instead of text, and also understand why a younger coworker considers an unannounced phone call an act of aggression. You can remember encyclopedias and use artificial intelligence. You know the sound of dial-up internet and the frustration of a cloud file that refuses to sync. There can be a cost to living between categories. Xennials are often too young to fully identify with classic Generation X stories and too old for stereotypical millennial ones. The cultural references are slightly off. The economic timing is slightly different. Even the label exists because large generational boxes blur at the edges. And that is what research on the Xennials in the workplace emphasizes. Generations fade into one another. The boundaries are useful for discussing shared historical exposure, not for predicting an individual's personality. So if you were born between 1976 and 1985, you do not possess a secret Xennial brain. Your temperament, family, country, education, economic background, and individual experiences matter far more than a 10-year label. But you may recognize a particular developmental story. You learned a world where being unreachable was normal. Then you learned a world where being unreachable requires airplane mode. You watched information go from scarce enough to seek out to abundant enough to filter. You experienced privacy before platforms. And you adapted while the definition of ordinary life was changing underneath you. Maybe that is why Xennials are difficult to place neatly. They are not simply the last analog adults or the first digital ones. They are people who remember crossing the bridge while it was still being built. If that describes your childhood, tell me the first piece of technology that made you feel like the future had arrived.